Fear is not always a scream. Sometimes it whispers through the fabric of a torn veil, hides in the eyes of a daughter who is trying not to cry in front of her own father, and curls around her feet like ancient dust, making each step heavier. Amaka did not cry, but something in her seemed to collapse silently as the ceremony progressed without a soul, only with obligations. The dress was borrowed, stained with mud at the edges, and the orisha beads on her wrists were dull, as if they were also in mourning. The father, with trembling hands, signed the papers with the haste of someone who wanted to erase a debt with society, even if it was with his own daughter. Outside, whispers slithered through the cracks in the walls like snakes. Not for free should she accept this. Marry him? That cursed man, with his crooked leg and broken destiny? The comments came from the women who had previously knocked on her door asking to borrow flour. Now they laughed softly as if Amaka's humiliation were a spectacle to alleviate their own misery. It was as if the entire village were saying, "Her lot is worse than mine." And for many there, that was enough. Kelechi entered the room with his head down. His cane tapped the floor with a dull, measured sound that reminded him of mournful drums at ancient funerals. He didn't look at anyone, not even at her. His clothes were clean but old. His eyes were dull. The air between them was thick, dense, as if the room itself rejected this marriage. A marriage without blessing, without music, without a future. And yet it happened. Amaka said nothing. She simply held out her hand for him to clasp them together. Thin ropes of sacred straw were wound around them by an unsmiling elder. "May the ancestors have mercy," he said. The phrase was not a blessing. It was almost a warning. She felt a chill run down her spine as a rope tightened around her wrist, as if her freedom were being sealed with that knot. Outside, a few children tried to peek in. One of them laughed out loud and shouted, "Crippled man's wife!" And everyone laughed, except her, except him. No one in that room knew. But there began a silence that would last for weeks, a silence made of averted glances, half-open doors and nights, in which each person slept with their backs to the other. What they also didn't know was that this silence wasn't the end. It was the beginning, because sometimes it is in the marriage that no one wanted, in the man that everyone rejected, that destiny hides the seed of what will blossom. But for Amaka, the pain still had no name, and what she would discover next would change everything. The house did not welcome her. There was no light breeze, no smell of food on the fire, no forgotten song in the corners of the wall. Only a thick silence, the kind of silence that lulls living things to sleep. When Amaka crossed the threshold, she felt as if she had entered a temple where pain was worshipped with fervor, not on altars, but in invisible details. The dust was thick, as if time had stopped there and chosen not to continue. The windows were covered with heavy curtains that blocked out even the sound of the world, and the air, though still, carried an ancient weight, as if many words had been silent there for too long. In the hallways, paintings were turned to the wall, as if they were ashamed to show what they once were. Mirrors hidden under black cloths, each one like a morning never overcome. No reflections were allowed. No memories were to be remembered. It was as if the house did not want witnesses. Amaka walked carefully, as if he was afraid of awakening something he shouldn't. The wood creaked beneath his feet, but Kelechi didn't react. Sitting in the corner of the room, with his legs stretched out and his cane resting on it, he seemed more like part of the furniture than someone alive. He observed everything with his eyes lowered, as if he was already waiting to be judged, and preferred not to raise his head. He never looked at her. His words were few and lukewarm, like the unsweetened tea she found on the table. He ate when she wasn't there. He slept in another room. He even avoided his own footsteps, as if his existence were an inconvenient noise. And when he spoke, rarely, it was in a neutral tone that revealed neither emotion nor intention. Amaka tried to get closer. She cooked food, tidied the room, washed the clothes. But everything seemed to be swallowed up by the emptiness of the house. Nothing left a mark. Nothing echoed. One night, she woke to the sound of a door creaking, slow footsteps descending toward the basement. A muffled sound, like a secret being whispered to the floor. Amaka followed with her eyes, but not with her body. Not yet. The next day, she tried to open one of the windows, but it resisted as if it were locked from the inside. She placed flowers on the table. They wilted the same day. She tried to make rice with coconut milk, like her mother used to make at harvest festival, but the smell dissolved into the air, as if it were unwelcome. There was something in that house that didn't want to be touched, and there was something in Kelechi that didn't want to be revealed. She began to wonder, what did this man see when he saw himself? And why did it need to be hidden from everyone? But that morning, when he heard the whisper coming from the basement for the second time, he understood that down there was a story sleeping that could no longer be kept quiet. And that was when the silence in the house began to change tone. Shame is something you can't shout. It creeps in. It's in the eyes that avoid others, in the shorter steps, in the hesitant breath when passing groups of people. Amaka woke up early that day. She kneaded the fufu firmly, wrapped the banana sweets in banana leaves like her grandmother used to do. She tied up her hair and walked down the dirt road with a basket on her head and hope hidden in her chest. She didn't want wealth. She wanted dignity. She wanted to prove to herself that she could be more than a forgotten wife in a house without mirrors. But the village doesn't forget, nor does it forgive. Not the kind of village that likes to see those at the bottom continue to be there. When the first child ran by and shouted, "The cripple's wife is selling cheap candy," she pretended not to hear. When another threw a small stone in her direction and laughed out loud, she took a deep breath and continued. But what came next was more than mockery. It was a siege, a collective laugh, a finger pointing. A woman from the market whispered too loudly, "Even her candy isn't good enough. It's made with the dust from the damn man's house." And everyone laughed, even those who had nothing better to do. Amaka tried to smile. She tried to offer again. She tried to justify the taste, the origin, the cleanliness. But she realized that, to these people, it didn't matter what she sold. It mattered who she was, or rather, who she slept with. It was as if everything about her was tainted by association, as if, by agreeing to live with Kelechi, she had become an extension of his lame leg, of his reputation as a cursed man, of his unwanted loneliness. When she returned home, with the basket still full and her face hot, she found Kelechi sitting on the porch, staring at the ground. He saw her. He saw the basket. He saw the dust on her dress. But he said nothing, not a gesture, not a murmur, just that same silence that hurt more than screams. She wanted him to say something, anything, to ask, to comfort, to get angry. But he just watched her, as if he already expected the world to treat her this way for being with him, as if he already knew that her pain was the price of his name. She walked slowly up the stairs, her legs heavy and her chest tight. When she closed the bedroom door, she didn't cry. She just sat on the floor and looked at her hands. And for the first time she thought, "Have I been buried alive in this marriage?" But that night, as he swept the room with pent-up anger, the broom bumped into something hard behind the bed, something covered in dust, hidden by time, and that's when the questions began to change. Curiosity is born of tiredness, of that moment when even pain demands distraction. Amaka had already washed all the clothes, swept the entire house, prepared 3 pots of food that no one praised. The day was stifling, and the house seemed more cramped than ever. As she moved the bed to clean the corners, she felt the broom hit something solid. It was a wooden point, covered by an old, stained cloth. She pulled it slowly. The cloth released fine, bitter dust, as if it had kept secrets for too long. Behind it, a painting. She turned it over carefully. It was an unfinished painting. A woman with her eyes closed, her body arched, her wings broken on her back. The feathers were frayed, as if they had been plucked one by one. But there was something about the expression on her face, something serene, almost sacred, as if, even mutilated, the woman carried dignity. In the bottom corner was a signature in elegant gold letters, initials intertwined with a curved line that resembled a serpent. Amaka frowned. It didn't suit the man who barely looked at her, who hid in the shadows and avoided even the mirrors themselves. She took the painting into the living room and propped it against the wall, waiting for a reaction. Kelechi entered, and for a moment her eyes were fixed on the image, just for a second. But she saw it. She saw the contained shock. She saw the memory crossing his irises like lightning in the cloudy sky. He looked away, turned away, and went back to the room as if he had seen a ghost. That night, as she washed the dishes, Amaka remembered an old saying of her grandmother's: "When the bird is silent, it is because thunder lives within it." Kelechi was not just a broken man. He was a silent man. And there was something there that needed to be said, even if it was in pain. The next day she went down to the basement and found more paintings stacked high, covered in cloth and cobwebs. African faces, clasped hands, imaginary maps of sunken cities, bold colors, precise lines. This was no amateur art. This was talent. This was pain molded into beauty. Then she began to understand. He had not always been that tired man. There was a flame there which time and rejection had tried to extinguish. But the fire, even under ashes, still burns. And in that basement of hidden screams. The past began to breathe again. But what she didn't know yet was that his voice was also stored somewhere, and it was waiting to be heard. The heart of a house beats in its hidden places, and in that house where the mirrors did not speak, where the light hesitated to enter, there was a basement that seemed to breathe on its own. Amaka went down again slowly, now willing to explore even further. With her bare feet, feeling the cold would seep into her bones. The door creaked as if in protest, and darkness opened before her like the mouth of a cave. She took a lamp, the weak wind flickering the flame, as if even the fire doubted it. In the corner, there were stacked boxes, a bench covered in rags, and an old tape recorder. She pressed the button carefully, as if touching a scar. A click, a noise, then a voice. It was him, not the silent man from the house above, but another version, younger, with a full, tender tone. "Mom, today the rice was cooked just right, just the way you liked it." Silence. "Tomorrow I'll finish the portrait of the lady with the red scarf." A long pause. "I still hear you, even without hearing anything." The tape played. Each sentence was an offering of longing. She listened for hours. There were dozens of recordings, one-sided conversation, monologues from someone caring for someone who was no longer responding. He described the days, the medicines, the colors of the sky, the dreams he had not realized. "Today I dreamed that you were dancing again, like at the corn festival." In another, he told her about the paintings. "I sold one today, Mom, but I hid the money. They can't know." "Who?" Amaka sat on the floor, with the recorder on her lap, as if she were holding a reliquary. That voice that no one knew had taken care of a life in silence. It had given without applause, loved without an audience. And she understood that there was pain there, but there was also honor. Not the honor of men who speak loudly in the square, but the honor whispered in the cold early mornings, between blankets and contained prayers. That night, she walked upstairs differently. She no longer looked at Kelechi with pity or distrust. Now there was respect. Now there was shared silence. The next day, she placed new flowers on the table. They did not wither, but as he put the tapes back, he found one that stood apart from the rest. It had only one word written on it, "Her," and in that moment, time seemed to hold its breath, because not everything that was said was for the past. Courage sometimes is not born of love. It is born of limits, from the exact point where keeping quiet becomes more painful than facing up to it. The morning the market filled with voices again, Amaka walked with firm steps, her face held high, her dress clean, her basket empty. She carried no sweets. She carried an old desire to be seen for who she really was. And when she heard the same mocking voice again, "The cripple's wife," she must be selling silence now. Something inside her snapped. She stopped in the middle of the square. Her eyes were dark, steady. Her body was still shaking, but her chest wasn't. She turned to the group that was laughing. Women, men, even children. Everyone who had learned to humiliate without thinking. Everyone who found humor in the pain of others. And then she spoke, quietly but firmly. "Do you know the man I married?" Someone responded with laughter. Another muttered an insult. She ignored it. "You judge him by his leg, but you don't know the path he took." Silence. "He took care of his mother until his last day, alone, with no one. While you whispered, he fed a woman who no longer spoke. While you called him cursed, he created beauty where there was only pain." The square fell silent. Not even the birds seemed inclined to interrupt. She stepped forward. "You laugh at him, but I ask you, who among you would be capable of loving without being loved, of caring without reward, of being silent and yet resisting?" Many people's eyes lowered, others clenched their fists, but no one answered. It was then that Kelechi appeared. No one had seen him arrive. He walked slowly, leaning on his cane, his eyes fixed on her. Amaka turned around in surprise, and for a moment, it seemed as if the world had stopped. He took a deep breath and said in a hoarse but clear voice, "She saw me whole, when I could no longer see myself." The sentence fell over the square like a gentle thunder. It caused no fear but reverence. Someone coughed. Another lowered his head. For the first time, no one laughed. On the way home, they walked side by side. Their feet were almost in sync. The silence was now shared. And there was a kind of peace in it that only those who have overcome shame and come out the other side know. But that same night, as he was taking a rug out of the living room to wash, Amaka heard the sound of hollow wood beneath his feet. He bent down, put his ear to the floor, and realized that there was something hidden there, something he had never shown to anyone, and that was about to change everything. Some secrets are not hidden forever. They just wait for love to be worthy enough to uncover them. The morning after the village fell silent, Amaka returned to the spot in the room where she had heard the hollow wood. She removed the rug, knelt, and touched each plank with her fingers, as if reading a map with her skin. One of them gave way. Carefully, she lifted it. Beneath it was a compartment of dark, polished wood, sealed with a padlock. Beside it was a small key, wrapped in a red cloth, folded with precision. The key turned without resistance, as if it had always been waiting for that hand. Inside, what she saw didn't seem to fit in that silent house. Contract with large companies, high-value shares, antique jewelry, a box with rare coins and detailed notes about investments, deadlines, profits. And at the bottom of the safe, a leather notebook with her name discreetly engraved on the cover. Amaka's hands were shaking. She leafed through the notebook slowly. There were unsent letters, drafts of apologies, plans for an art gallery, and a phrase repeated more than once. If one day she loves me for who I am now, then I will know I can show her who I was. The words pierced her chest like sweet, painful arrows. He didn't pretend to be poor out of pride. It was protection. It was fear. It was a long wait for someone who would see beyond the appearance, beyond the leg, beyond the dark house. That night, he walked into the room and found her sitting with her notebook on her lap. There was no surprise on his face, only acceptance. He sat down beside her. They tried to take everything. My name, my blood, my art. I thought if I erased my history, I would be safe. But what I discovered is that you don't protect yourself from pain by hiding the light. Amaka touched his hand for the first time, without hesitation. There was beauty in what he kept, but even more in what he revealed, in the silent faith that one day he would be seen, not for what he had, but for what he had endured. The next day, he took her to an empty lot in the city center. They stopped in front of an old building with closed doors. He handed her a golden key. "Now it's our turn," he said. And in that key dwelt the beginning of a new name. But what she would find behind those doors was greater than any fortune. The gate creaked as Amaka turned the golden key. The rust resisted for a moment, as if testing the strength of her resolve, then gave way with a crack that echoed through the void. On the other side, the old hall revealed itself, tall, marked by the shadows of time, with peeling walls and a cement floor that still bore stains of paint like traces of interrupted dreams. There was a smell of something forgotten, but not dead. The air there was not of an end, but of waiting. Kelechi walked in behind her, his steps slow but full of something she had never seen before, a quiet pride. He looked at each crack, as if he were recognizing an old friend. "This," he said hoarsely, "is where it all began. Before they stole me, before they broke me." He handed her an envelope, yellowed with age. Inside were drawings of an old gallery, precise lines, open rooms, spaces of light. "I've never been able to open it again until now." Over the next few days, they worked side by side. She wiped the walls with wet cloths and bows. He restored frames with scarred but steady hands. Amaka brought dried flowers to decorate the corners. Kelechi hung new paintings, portraits she had never seen before, of women with hand-sewn wings, of men with eyes that seemed to contain entire storms. On the day of the reopening, the city came to a standstill. The name blazed over the entrance. Kelechi and Amaka, Afro-inspired art and technology. He wore a ceremonial gown with gold trim. She wore a gown made from generations of family fabrics, including fragments of the torn veil that once symbolized humiliation, now sewn onto her wrist like a victory bracelet. The people came, the same ones who had mocked, the same ones who had doubted. Some clapped, others just watched, but no one laughed. The square was full. The drums began to beat, measured, ancient, and they marched together, he with a golden cane, she with her steady eyes, both of them enveloped not by wealth, but by dignity. When they arrived home, exhausted and silent, they found an envelope on the table. No name, no stamp, just a note. "Now you have everything, and yet you chose the essential." On the back, a handwritten line, and in it, the beginning of a new reunion. The note wasn't signed, just one sentence on the back, written in the same firm handwriting she would recognize anywhere. "Thank you for not giving up on me before I found myself." Amaka stood there, holding the paper as if it were a piece of his soul. And in that silence that only truth brings, she felt the circle closing. Not like someone finishing a story, but like someone returning to the origin with new eyes. The following Sunday, she returned to the room where she had first found the painting. She carefully removed it from the wall. It had been there for months, now finished. The woman with the broken wings had flown. The feathers, once shattered, were sewn together with gold thread, like scars that had been accepted. It was her, but not as she was. It was as she had become. Beside the image in small letters was the same phrase from the altar spoken by Kelechi before the village. She saw me whole when I could no longer see myself. With the help of women from the village, Amaka opened a small school right there in the old mansion. Not an ordinary school, but a place where rejected women could learn art, reading, finance, and silence, because she knew that silence, when listened to with respect, also teaches. On the first day of school, she placed a board above the blackboard, and there, for all to see, she wrote in white chalk the sentence that now inhabited her flesh. It was his leg that staggered, but it was my soul that was lame. The students, most of them young women who had been expelled, abandoned, humiliated, looked at her in astonishment. Some cried. Others just nodded, as if they had finally been seen. Kelechi began visiting the school on Wednesdays. He would sit quietly and paint in the courtyard while classes were in session. He didn't say much, but everyone knew this man was part of the root. And where there's a firm root, there can be flowers, even after a storm. In the last scene of that cycle, Amaka buried a small coin in the school garden, an old coin which he had given her when he revealed the safe. To remember that faith, when planted, blooms in silence. And in that wet earth, the story did not end. It only became the seed for others. If this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our next stories, each one made with soul, truth, and purpose. Leave your like, comment below what moved you the most, and share it with someone who needs to remember that true love sees the invisible